The City of Charleston has a comprehensive website that outlines its flooding and sea level rise strategies. Today, I talk one-on-one with the City of Charleston's Chief Resilience Officer, Dale Morris, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Dale Morris, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Needless to say, you are the Chief Resilience Officer that is, for the City of Charleston. So tell me, when it comes to obviously dealing with the water and flooding and other issues, what's new, what's now?
So what's new is we just released an update to the city's flooding and sea level rise strategy. The original strategy was developed in 2015. It was improved and expanded upon in 2019. There's a lot of work that's been done in the intervening years. A lot of projects have been implemented and finished. Some are underway. A lot of analysis has been done regarding sea level rise and future water level conditions. We have the land and water analysis, the city comprehensive plan, and now the city rewrite of the zoning ordinance, which is, that's a lot of work. And one of the things that was very clear to me when I started is the city was not communicating as effectively as maybe it needed to on this. This is really complex stuff, and there's a lot happening, and there wasn't one single source for citizens or stakeholders or businesses or folks from outside the city looking and say, where would I find all this information? What is the city doing, and where would I find more? So we developed this update to the sea level rise strategy as an online-only story map product. You can go to the website, you can go online and see it. Any tablet or smartphone or computer can navigate to the site, and then you'll see a pretty attractive, we think, explanation of all the different things we're doing pursuant to the previous and the current flooding and sea level rise strategy. So it's a good one-stop shop for information on this work. One of the things we're really proud of, just to continue here, is the Dutch dialogues. I was a part of that process, led that process. One of the things we said was in Dutch dialogues was be very careful with the use of fill in low-lying areas. So fill when you construct homes or redevelop homes or prepare sites for development. The importation of fill can change the local hydrology and water flow off of that development site. And it was actually causing, the bad use of fill was causing some challenges in some places. So we worked here in the city. We worked with the realtors, the home builders, the Chamber of Commerce, the Historic Charleston Foundation, environmental groups, to have a consensus recommendation of how we could address fill. And City Council 2 or 3 weeks ago passed the ordinance to prohibit slab-on-grade construction in the 100-year floodplain. That is a different way of getting at the fill issue because it's mostly slab-on-grade foundations that require the use of fill to bring the slab up to the design flood elevation so it's safe according to the floodplain management regulations. So this is a different way of getting at that. And one final thing is we're working also on the long-term comprehensive mitigated water plan. We started that last September. We're about half of the way done, and we hope to have that strategy plan done for the city by the end of this year. And that's a 25-year look forward of, as I say, how do we stay here? What do we need to do to be able to stay here safely, productively for the citizens of Charleston?
Now, going back to the fill issue, obviously, Dale, what was the local hydrology before the Dutch dialogues came in?
Well, so there, as we all know, there's some low-lying land in the city of Charleston. Sometimes that low-lying land can actually swampy and mucky and can actually do pretty good at storing some water. Sometimes it takes water from upstream and stores it there, absorbs it. And when homes or neighbors were being developed in those areas, they were bringing in concrete, and to raise the concrete slab to the level needed for public safety, sort of what's called the design flood elevation, they were bringing in fill. And often the quality of that fill was not the same as the quality of the existing soil that was there. And so you'd get water running off from the site more rapidly, water not being stored on the site in a certain way. And in the profession, we talk about the unwise use of fill or the unwise development. So roads and roofs and rain equals rapid runoff and regret. So that's a little saying that we all use. So roads and roof and rain equals rapid runoff and regret. And this ban on slab on grade will start to really address that across the city. And again, we had a good consortium of folks working with us to do that. So it was the ordinance was adopted unanimously by council a couple weeks ago, and we think it's a really good start of how to do this. And a lot of people who are watching Charleston from outside, colleagues in other cities, they're pretty surprised and impressed that we were able to do this.
So where's the unwise development now in the city of Charleston?
It's unwise development. So you can develop in a lot of places. It's just how do you develop? And so this gets at that area. You know, in the Dutch dialogues, we said be very careful and use the understanding of land elevation and current and future water elevation, because of sea level rise, that water elevation is going to change. And whether you're in a tidal, so you can be on the harbor or in the rivers, and there's a water elevation there, but you can be in a tidal creek, or you can be downstream in a ditch or a channel or a creek that's flowing water past your house. And those water levels will change with rainfall, with sea level rise, with all those things. So that's what we're talking about, is how do we develop safely there? And again, when you ban slab-on-grade foundations, what that means is you're going to put the home on a pier and beam or a pile foundation. It's what we do at the beachfront. It's not like it's rocket science. But by doing that, you don't need to bring fill in. The water then can flow under the house and be stored there if you have a bad rainfall. It doesn't go onto the neighbor's property or someone downstream in the creek. But it also, over time, we don't know how quickly the seas are going to rise or how dynamically the weather is going to change. We just don't know. But what this does is it will allow a future homeowner to perhaps elevate his or her home in a more cost-effective way, because it's already on the pier on beams and you just raise it up. If you have a house that's on a slab-on-grade foundation, it's really expensive and really difficult to elevate that home. So this is a transitional way of approaching development.
Now, where exactly is the land elevation in these in these unwise development areas?
What do you mean? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Oh, no worries. Give me an example of land elevation in these unwise development areas in the city of Charleston.
So, for instance, you recall there was a development on Johns Island. It was called Oakville. It was near the airport, but it was in the Burden Creek watershed. And the Burden Creek watershed was actually, it had more tidal flow or more stream flow because there's been some development upstream. And with sea level rise, Burden Creek is connected to the Stoney River, and that's connected to the Atlantic Ocean. So sea level rise is going to impact that. There were a number of homes slated for development there, and the city and the developer who was entitled to develop, we worked together with the airport to prevent the development or stop that development from going forward, to make the developer whole, right? So there was a payment made to the developers, and then he sold the land to the airport, and then we worked with the Greenbelt,
right,
the County Greenbelt, and the Low Country Land Trust and other land trusts to take that land that was low and take it out of development possibility. And so eventually, this could become a park or a kayak launch spot because it's a wonderful tidal creek. But it also will allow the marsh that's nearby to migrate inland as the sea level rise. And marsh migration inland is actually a very adaptive process through which we can mitigate some future tidal risk from sea level rise.
So where are those other locations for future tidal risk, that is, I should say?
But I mean, just, any low-lying area around the city, if you look, so we, in the water plan, we're talking about the edge, right? Yes. So in the peninsula, we have the edge, we know the Army Corps projects there. Right. But let's say on Daniel Island or in West Ashley, Maryville, Ashleyville, just east of Maryville, Ashley is that wonderful marsh. Right. So you're going to be very careful about developing in a insensitive way in those kinds of areas. There are areas in the Church Creek Basin or on Johns Island or on James Islands. Like, we know they're likely to have more flood problems because they're low already. And with the sea level rise occurring and perhaps more rainfall occurring within that drainage basin, we know those areas are at risk for future flood impacts. So we just need to, and we have that all mapped. It's mapped in the land and water analysis, and look at the sea level rise strategy for that. And it's well mapped in the city's comprehensive plan from 2021. It's called the low and conserved area. And the low and conserved area and parks and natural areas of the city, that's about 60-some% of the total city land mass. So we are now transitioning to an approach to not develop there or not develop densely there. We have some high ground in the city, the Maybank Ridge on both James Island and Johns Island, Sam Rittenberg and Highway 17 through West Ashley, and there's some other parts. The Kaneohe Peninsula, Clements Ferry Road, Meeting and King on the peninsula, that's relative high ground. So we can develop there in a smart way. In the other areas, we can start to pull back from development in those low-lying areas.
Where do you want to pull back in those low-lying areas?
Well, what do you mean where? I mean, you'd pull back to the high ground, right? And what that's going to eventually require is more density. Right. And density to some people, we understand very clearly, it means traffic. Right. You know, you can develop in new ways where if you have mixed-use development with businesses and stores, retail, and all that nearby to where people are living, you can actually have less traffic. So these things have been proposed already. They're in the comprehensive plan. Those are the kind of strategies we need. So we're not going to force anyone out. Sure. No one's going to be required to move involuntarily. But over time, and we're talking about a generation or two, we will slowly pull back from our edges. We just know that's happening. And as I tell people, it's not unique to Charleston. This is happening up and down the East Coast and the Gulf Coast of the United States. And this will be a generational change, not a rapid change.
Rapid change. And let me ask you, when it comes to the sea level rise, how are those sea level rises compromising the city's drainage system right now?
So sea level rise, so in the city of Charleston, in the last 100 years, we've already had 13 inches of measured sea level rise. So it's a lot. Yeah. 7 of that 13 has come in the last 30. So a lot of it's accelerating. This is happening around the world, certainly around, and we know it here in Charleston, but also in Norfolk and Wilmington, Savannah, and Miami, and all those places, right? The federal agencies and the scientists from the universities and experts who study this, they anticipate that we will have 14 inches of sea level rise over the next 30 years. So we had 7 in the last 30, 14 in the next 30. So we have to understand what that means for our land elevation and water elevation. And these old drainage ditches that have just sort of an outfall, gravity outfall into the tidal creeks or the rivers, we have to understand how those perform with this higher water level. Because in fact, if the tide's high and it's coming into that drainage ditch, the water that's trying to get out of it will meet that and not get out as fast. And then it'll back up in neighborhoods. At the same time, if we get too much sea level rise, you may in fact get water being imported into neighborhoods because the drainage ditch is conveying water upland. Right. So we have this condition with the drainage pipes that are underground in some parts of the city. We've had to put check valves on them because they're right at the water level. We've had to put check valves on those outfalls, those pipe outfalls, so that the tide doesn't come up through the pipes and get into the streets during high tide events. So these are things that are not just happening in Charleston, they're happening here, they're happening elsewhere. And so a lot of cities are working on this, and we can learn from each other. And we're doing that.
And how many of those check values have you all put in those drainage pipes so far?
I want to say it's over 40. I mean, wow. It's a lot. We just installed one over, I think, on Washington Street. The stormwater management department, which does great work for the city, just installed those not within the last couple of months. Wow. So there are a number of them that have been placed in on some in West Ashley, I think a couple on James Island, I think, and then a lot on the peninsula, because that's where the subsurface drainage mostly is, because it's higher developed and more densely developed.
Oh yes, absolutely. And where do you foresee the check values going in other locations?
So with a drainage ditch, you can't use a check valve, you have to use a tide gate. And so those are, again, in the lowest lying areas. Right. Those are things we are studying right now within the context of the comprehensive water plan, where those low areas are and where the outflows are and how they're drained. And then the stormwater department has a number of models. They have the various basins modeled, and we understand that too collectively where those places are. We're not in huge risk right now.
Okay.
There's still some elevation between the high tide and the bottom of that ditch.
Sure.
With 14 inches of sea level rise,
Right.
and we don't know how rapidly that would occur. We have to plan for that. And that's what this, again, we are one of the few cities, and I say this, we can say this with pride here in Charleston, the citizens supported this. We are looking forward 25 years with our water plan. Not many cities are doing that, but most cities plan in 5 and 10 year increments. We're looking forward at the water levels for 25 years from now. And that will help us inform decisions by city council and investments by city council. Okay, what do we need to do in year 5 or year 10? And do we hit a tipping point, or do we need to, adapt our strategy, adaptive management? Do we need to do that in year 15 or 20, depending on the rate of sea level rise? Those are things we're looking at in this water plan.
And going by the conditions right now, what do you foresee needs to be adapted with that plan?
Again, it's going to recommend some land use policy changes. Again, we have the comp plan that says we're not going to develop in the low-lying areas or only develop in certain ways. There may be recommendations. We're not through with the work yet, right? There may be recommendations for a further restriction or further improvements on how we develop there in a safe way. There's going to be a need for some investment. Both gray infrastructure and green infrastructure. Mother Nature can help us here. She can't solve all the problems, but she does provide some benefits to us. We know what the tide does. What the marsh does when tide's coming in. It absorbs it, it's a sponge. So those are all really important things. We can see some need for gray infrastructure. That's going to be needed around the city. So pipes and pumps, right? More drainage ditches and things like that. And then also, we're gonna need some policy changes, some infrastructure changes. I'm trying to think of all the components we've looked at. So again, I would say, we're in the middle of the work. Just stay tuned for that.
Sure. And quickly, how many drainage pipes do you all want to install in the next 5 to 10 years?
We're still studying that. We just don't know that miles of pipe. That's always a question that comes up. Again, there's promising effort that our congressional delegation is trying to help us to clean the brick arches. The existing drainage system under the city, under the peninsula, is old historic structures, 150, 130, 150 years old, that over the many, many, many years is filled up with sediment and isn't performing like it should. But if we clean that out and line that in a way and the city's already done some of this work, I mean, those brick arch tunnels are 3 feet by 5 feet wide. They can move a lot of water. So there's a lot of things we can be doing. And by putting this all together, we can try to stay safe and adapt to the flood issues. And again, all these things are described in this flooding and sea level rise strategy. So for those who want more information, there's 100 pages if you would print them out. There's a lot of information there.
Yeah, Charleston-sc.gov.
Charleston-sc.gov, or just type in the 2023 flooding and sea level rise strategy for City of Charleston. You'll come right to it.
And what is the biggest difference about this plan in your mind?
Well, this plan is just an update to the 2019 plan. The 2019 plan set sort of the 5 key areas we need to work on. That's governance, resources, outreach, partnerships, infrastructure, and land use, right? And so we've done a lot. What this plan shows is all the stuff that we have been doing, and we have a chart where we track our progress, and we're trying to be very honest with what we've done and what we need to do and what we need to start. So that's pretty good. One of the biggest differences between the 2019 and the 2023 strategy is that we have set 14 inches of sea level rise as our planning horizon over the next 30 years, or as our planning amount. That's a very specific number, and it's based upon this report from all the scientists last year saying 14 inches is pretty confident. But we already have, within the 2019 strategy, an assumption between now and 2070, we could have between 2 and 4 feet of sea level rise. So that's already there, but we just created an interim target between 50 years from now and 15 years from now, or 25 years from now. So,
Wow. And another issue that that's actually on the horizon right now is heat. And I know
Yes.
that in the last interview, you mentioned to me that you want to tackle heat resilience. What does heat resilience mean in Charleston?
yeah, exactly. It's a great question, right? So people down here say it's hot. It's always been hot. No big deal.
Yes.
Well, that's not absolutely true. What we're finding out, a lot of science is going on, a lot of research is going on in some of the nation's hottest cities. So Phoenix and Dallas and Houston and Miami and whatever. And they realize that long-term or continued exposure to high heat has substantial impacts upon an individual's health. So if it's hot in the daytime and you can get cool at night, you have good air conditioner and whatever, it's okay, right? Your body has a chance to recover. But if you're repeatedly exposed to excessive heat, like an outdoor worker, or maybe like a college athlete or high school athlete who's out practicing in the hot sun and doesn't go home to an air-conditioned place, or there's certain groups of people, pregnant people, the elderly, people with pre-existing certain medical conditions, heart issues, respiratory issues, outdoor workers, all those people, if they have too much exposure to heat, it impacts their health, sometimes substantially. So the city of Charleston, as the climate changes, we're expecting more warmth in the south, right? As the climate changes, we need to understand what that means for our citizens and the residents, tourists, outdoor workers, athletes at our high schools, colleges, whatever.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that. So we're working with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the cities of Miami, Phoenix, and Las Vegas in a pilot project to research this issue. And that pilot will eventually recommend some policy changes or policy considerations for how we manage this. And it may also, which is quite interesting to me, may also free up some funding for us to implement some projects that may help folks who don't have air conditioning.
Yeah.
We already have some of those good projects in the city already for air conditioners, but maybe we can up our game and do better with that going forward. And again, this is not something that will occur in 2023. This is research that may yield results in 2024, 2026, something like that.
What are those hot zones right now that actually need immediate attention here in the city?
And so the city, and we'll put this in the next month or two, you will see on the city website a heat map that was done by the city GIS department. And there are a lot of spots. It's not surprising where there's a lot of asphalt and concrete and houses. The heat is pretty intense, right? So on the peninsula, there's a lot, there's a lot of high heat spots, a lot of hot spots. But we also noticed in this analysis, we see that there are we did a tree cover analysis. So what's our tree canopy look like?
Right.
And guess what? The hot spots from heat overlap with the empty spots of trees, right? So the land cover is low.
Right.
So this heat analysis can help us think, where do we plant trees? And there's an added benefit, because if we plant the right kind of trees, and trees take a while to grow, right? And you take the right kind of tree that can suck up water, and we have a lot of this here, not some crazy tree from somewhere else that doesn't manage water, but one that's local. If we plant those in the right spots, and they're low-lying spots or heat deserts and tree deserts, we're going to get both heat risk mitigation as well as flood risk mitigation from that. So this is an adaptive way of thinking about the challenge.
Oh man, so how much money do you need to actually plant some of those trees?
Well, planting a tree isn't expensive. It's not, the trees aren't expensive, and actually there are some. So South Carolina, the state government of South Carolina sometimes makes trees available. Again, we have to make sure it's the right kind of tree for the right kind of place, right? We have to understand, if the tree's only 10 feet tall and you plant it, it's not going to suck up a lot of water or provide a lot of leaves for heat risk mitigation in year 1, but in year 10 and 20, it will make a difference. It's not the trees, it's actually the maintenance of the trees, because, you plant a tree, you got to give some love for the first 3, 4, 5 years, and prune it up and all that, make sure it's not diseased. That's what takes a lot of the time. So the city already has a pretty strong tree maintenance program, tree planting program. we could up that game. We could think of, and there are resources out there. We're pondering the possibility of applying for a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to help us with acquiring trees and getting them in the ground and maintaining them. So there's, with the Inflation Reduction Act, so the bill that was passed last year,
Right.
and the bipartisan infrastructure law, there is money available to grants to help us do these things, and we need to take advantage of it. And the good thing is that money won't be exhausted. There's a sufficient amount of money that it'll probably take 5 or 7 years for that money to be exhausted. So we have time to plan this well.
And this might be a complicated question, Dale, but what are the historic heat trends here in Charleston?
So Charleston's, Charleston's hot. It's going to get a little bit hotter. I think the people that are long-term residents, they may not notice it, but there's a lot of folks from the north that have moved here,
yes,
and they're not used to this heat, right? So you have that going on again, and we anticipate, I think NOAA is anticipating sort of a daily increase in the average temperature of about 1 to 2 degrees. So that doesn't sound like much, but its impact upon health can be substantial. So those are the kind of things we're looking at. And again, these are things we need to think about over the mid and long term. It's not something we want to worry about next year. So the medical university here, they're tracking the number of people who come in with heat stroke and heat exhaustion. There was a study done on heat in the medical district in 2020, and it showed on a hot summer day, one area had an average temperature of 115 degrees, and another area had an average temperature or a nominal temperature of 89 degrees at the same moment. And it just depends on heated sun exposure, wind direction,
right,
the material that the building was made from, how much, if there were trees around. Right. There's a lot of factors that go into how heat manifests in a particular area. And so understanding that is really important. And for the medical district, this is really important because they had people coming from their garages who going there for a medical reason, obviously.
Right.
And if they have to walk through those high heat areas,
oh, yes,
does that increase their health problem?
Mm-hmm.
Or can we do something to maybe improve or mitigate that heat impact so they're not worse off when they go to the doctors because of heat? So those are the kind of things that the medical district is looking at and we're trying to look at across the city.
And what are those other factors that you're seeing with this plan right now?
Again, we've done some analysis and we're waiting to report that to the community where we did the analysis.
Okay.
But we did this heat study with the medical district in 2020. We see similar things in a particular neighborhood, in a particular playground.
Oh, yeah.
There could have been, just depending on the material that the playground was made from, and if there was mulch or grass or trees right around, there was 20 degrees difference. And for a young kid, child, they're not robust in their systems, right? They're growing up,
right?
So the impact upon their health from high heat exposure could be bad, right? They just want to go, kids, they want to go jump in the fountain, right? Find the hose or jump in the water and
right
down. But if you don't have that and they're outside playing around, what can we learn from that kind of study so that the investments the city is making going forward can reflect this better knowledge so that they're healthier?
And I hope to get you back in during the summer to talk more about this and obviously your water plan as well. But for now, Dale Morris with the City of Charleston, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. You take care.
Likewise.
All right.